Okay, a very big welcome to me, Nick G4IWO. I'm the chair of Pennine Ham Radio Club. It's a new club that's been set up. It's originated up here in the Pennine Hills of Northern England from a number of us that were active and involved in other radio clubs here. And we decided to set up essentially what was and will be an online club. Most of our activities will be online. But we're going to do the special thing of encouraging people to run portable operations, and not just to send us video clips from what they're doing, but where we can do, try and provide live links to those portable operations. So when those of us who go up here in the hills, in the Pennines, operating our radios, go and work parks on the air or summits on the air, or just having some fun operating portable radio, we'll try and put those live on air. So it seemed very fitting to me that the first speaker we've got for Pennine Ham as a radio club organising a meeting for the world to radio amateurs is Tim G5TM. And for those that haven't had a peek yet, and go and have a look afterwards, Tim has got a fantastic YouTube channel of his portable operations and the fun that he has with antennas in particular. And I know both portable operating and antennas that we use as radio amateurs and that we use when we're away from home is something we're all absolutely fascinated with in this radio club. So Tim, that's what I'm going to give you by way of introduction. I know as well there are some other bits, some honours to bestow upon you. I think you're the editor of the RSGB Basics magazine that runs alongside the Radcom that comes out and is published online. And that's a lovely little addition to the RSGB stable. So Tim, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you and let you take it away.
Well, thank you, first of all, for that nice introduction, Nick. And well, thank you for inviting me for your sort of inaugural thing. It's brilliant. And I know you guys are, yeah, it's fantastic. So I'm really honored. So thank you very much. First thing I got to try and master, by the way, is how to share my screen. So that could let's just get that thing going first. What I'm going to do tonight really is just chat about my experiences of working portable and just, yes, the antennas I've used, the sort of things I've considered and had to sort of overcome really in the 7 years I've been licensed. I know amongst us tonight, as you've just mentioned earlier, we do have somebody whose experiences of working portable will probably eclipse mine by quite a bit. That would be Ken. So I'll be really interested to hear Ken's take on stuff as well. Not that I'm asking Ken to do any of the hard work, but it'd be really useful to hear Ken's views. And of course, anybody else, in fact, yourself included, and everybody else who have been used to working sort of HF portable more than anything. I have got into 2 meters a bit, but my first love really is working, you know, SSB, HF portable is kind of what I like doing. So what I'm going to try and do first of all is try to share the screen. So this could go horribly wrong. If you see any blue smoke, you know what's happened, okay? So is it a case of clicking the share screen thing at the bottom? Is that the one I need to click on? I think I'll try that. And can you see that, guys? Can someone tell me whether they can see that?
No, I can't see anything yet, Tim. So you've got to do two things. You've got to hit the share button.
All right, yeah.
And then you've got to, oh, here we go. Right, you've done it. So I can now see your screen.
Right, so if I do that, can you see that?
All I can see at the moment, I can now see mental and physical health.
That's the one. Yeah, the YouTube. Okay, the YouTube, the PowerPoint. So if I put that into a slideshow, hopefully that'll be fine. So, okay, bear with me, guys. Right, so how is that looking? Is that okay?
Absolutely super.
And what I'll do, I'll just hide that so it won't block the screen. So hopefully that's okay. All right. So, yeah, now, first of all, there's 2 reasons why I like going portable. This is probably shared by a lot of us, really. The first thing is it's getting away from stuff because I work full time. Give you the sob story, but I'm busy with the family, working full time, and actually getting away for an hour or two, maybe every other week, actually does help. So for me, it's me time, which I think, you know, is a bit self-indulgent in this day and age, but I do like a bit of me time now and again. And I think we're getting away, even if it's just driving just to a seaside location or being on a hilltop somewhere. It just gives you that sort of ability to get away from things. And I think portable operating does that for you, whether you're going on 2 meters, whether whatever you're doing, frankly, it allows you to do that. It's also the feeling of satisfaction and the challenge as well, especially if you're operating in lower power levels. So if you're operating sort of QRP, just adds an extra dimension to things, and the ability to bust a pile up and hear things that you wouldn't be able to hear at home in terms of signals when you get out and about is actually quite a good feeling. Some people say that operating mobile and portable is a bit of a compromise. Now, I think compromise is central to everything we do anyway. I don't think there's many of us that don't compromise something in this hobby. And for me, getting out and about isn't that much of a compromise. If you've got a massive sort of beam or Yagi system at home, fair enough. But the way I see it is what you might sometimes lose if you use a slightly less than sort of full-sized antenna out and about. And you don't have to do that, by the way. You gain by having a much better receive. I mean, if you look at what I've got here, I mean, simple thing on transmit, for example. Okay, let's say if you're using a short vertical at home compared to a full-sized half wave at home vertical, sure, you're probably going to be down by 1 or 2 S points. But at home, if you're using a vertical, don't have to use a vertical, of course, but if you did use a vertical at home, chances are you're probably going to have a noise flow of something, probably on average, something between 2 and 5, 6 S units. Most of us get worse than that. Get out and about, away from everything, no noise sources, and suddenly you can hear signals you'd never hear at home. And it's the old adage, isn't it? There's no point trying to work people you can't hear. And I think going away portable, away from the noise level, away from the noise and stuff like that, is a godsend. And I think that's probably the biggest thing about it. And if you think about it, I got in yellow there. Overall, you probably gain about 12 dB being outdoors, simply because, yeah, you might be down a bit if you use a shorter antenna, not that you have to, but you'll be at least probably 2, 3 or 4 S units better in terms of receive, because you'd hear people with lower signals you'd never hear at home, basically. Now, I want to talk about mobile with inverted commas, because I'm a bit of a wuss perhaps, but I never operate when I'm actually driving. I only operate parked up. And I am a heathen because I do also operate parked up with, sorry, I don't want anyone to faint, but I do use something called a mag mount, all right? And I know on HF that's not the done thing, but I've taken the decision not to drill into the car. I have actually got a lip mount, a K400 lip mount, which I might try and use. So for me, I'm lucky because I live a 10-minute drive from the sea. And that's very, very fortunate. Now, I know not all of us have that. And as we'll see later, and Ken no doubt will back this up, that being by the ocean, being right next to the sea is such a marvelous boost for what you do. So what have I used? Well, I've experimented. So I've used sort of adjustable loading coils to give me on several bands with a single whip. So the whip I've used, I've generally used something called a tank whip, which is a very cheap 2-piece quarter wave on 11 meters whispered at, but it also works well on 10 meters as a quarter wave. And the coil you've got there is called the slide winder coil. They're readily available. Lots of people use them. They're great. They're very lightweight, and you can move that coil up and down. Obviously, where it is there, it's probably tuned for something like about 15 or 12 meters there. Adjust it down, gives you more inductance. I quite easily could get 40 meters through 12 meters, because the 9-foot whip is a bit long with the coil for 10 meters. But I could quite easily work 40, 20, 17, 15, that kind of thing with that setup. And you know, for what it is, it works pretty well. Use that with the triple mag mount there. What I've also been using lately is another version of it. It's actually called the Mad Dog coil. It originates from Australia. It's a guy called Marty that sells them. He reached out to me. It's the only freebie I've ever taken. And I've been, as a creator on YouTube, you do get offered lots and lots of stuff with handhelds from Retivis and TID Radio and all these places, which is great. But I'm not big into that. But Marty sent this out, contacted me and said, well, why not try this? And this is a coil, a bit like the Wolf River coil, where you can use different collars and you can tune it for maybe 2 or 3 bands. And it makes tuning a bit easier because you just literally take the jumper out of one collar, move it to another. And again, I've used that predominantly on the car with the 9-foot tank whip. You don't have to use all 3 collars. You can use one collar. And it certainly seems to work okay as well. So that's another version of what I've been using. That'll tune down to 80 meters with a 17-foot telescopic whip. Probably not very efficient, but it will get you on 80 meters if that's what you want to do. I've also experimented with using a tuner, as I'll show you in a minute, with the tank whip, just to see how it worked, really. It did okay. I mean, obviously, it's not a brilliant setup. Use a short sort of 60, 80 centimeter bit of coax between the tuner and the whip itself. This is an LDG RT100 tuner. This usually needs a bias T to work by squirting sort of DC up the coax, but because I've got a Yaesu rig with the ATAS function for the ATAS antenna, it actually works without the need for the bias T if you use ATAS with a Yaesu rig. So you can actually just use it without any power source required for the tuner, which makes it quite handy. It is also weather resistant. I'm not sure how weatherproof it is. But again, I was near the sea. I put a 9-foot whip on, and I was able to tune 10 through 17. So these are very rustic, shall we say, non-textbook type setups, but I've had a lot of fun with them, especially when the higher bands are opened. And of course, they're starting to open a lot now, aren't they, in the last week or two, which is really good news. And there's another look at that setup. You'll notice I've got a choke right at the feed point there, which is 8 turns of RG58 through a 240/43 toroid, I believe. One morning, I must have had some sort of brainstorm, not in a good way, because I drove down to my local sea spot and decided, you know what, it was like 6 a.m. in the summer, and I thought, stuff it, I'm going to put up my triple mag and put the actual 17-foot telescopic whip on the car. Now, you can imagine it wasn't that windy because they're not that robust, especially like that, as you can see there. But I had a bit of fun on 20 meters nonetheless. That's a pure quarter wave. So that actually worked pretty well, to be fair, and worked a bit of DX that morning as well. The other thing I've had to consider, as we all do, is power. Now, we're quite fortunate, I think, recently, because in the last few years, there's been some quite big advancement in terms of the portability of batteries and things. I mean, I think long gone are the days now we lug a sort of 20 amp hour lead acid battery somewhere up a hill. I mean, people might still want to do that, but for me, that's probably a degree of masochism too far. So batteries wise, on the left, you'll see a more traditional sort of lead acid style battery, which I've actually got. I bought that quite a few years ago. It's a 36 amp hour 12 volt. Now, if you can see that, hopefully you can, in the bottom left, I've indicated in yellow the weight. Now weighs 11 kilos, which is quite a hefty weight if you want to carry that around anyway. Because you can probably get smaller batteries, which will be slightly less weighty. Now, on the right, you've got Tracer. Now, Tracer are the more pricier versions of what is known as LiFePO4 batteries, which you've probably all heard of. These are much lighter. And for example, the one I've got is the bottom right. I bought that quite a while ago, back in 2016. It's still going. It's a 24 amp hour, 12 volt. And that weighs 3 kilos. So it weighs a quarter of the weight of the lead acid. And I know with those, I could be running 100 watts on sideband, calling CQ, and I could get probably 6 to 7 hours out of it, no problems at all. Dial it back to 50 watts or something, you'll get a lot more time out of it again. And it's a very lightweight, good option to use. The ones now that are probably even better in terms of price are known as Ultramax. If you go on eBay, you'll find they're sort of golf cart buggies, and they come with connectors which are basically fitted with power poles on them. Now, you can get a 24 amp hour version of that for about less than half the price, about 130, 140 pounds. I've got one, and it's just as good, and it's just as light. You can pick it up with one finger like that with the strap, no problems at all. And for portable operating, they're an absolute boon. In fact, this is one I prepared earlier. This is one I just bought, actually, because I've just acquired a G90 radio. And I don't know whether any of you know this, if you've watched my channel at all, I'm trying to get fit, which is a bit of a nightmare. But I managed to lose about £9 in a month, which is good. Not in money, but in weight. Now, this one I've got from Ultramax is a 10 amp hour. I'm not sure if it's showing the right way up on the camera, but it's a 10 amp hour, 12 volt LiFePO 4. Literally hold it like that. And with a G90 with what, 20 watts output, that would give me a good few hours, no problems at all. Spade connector there. Get the power. You can get an aftermarket sort of ready-made lead if you want to. You can do your own. I fitted it with power poles, and that'll be coming up to a portable operating spot soon, hopefully, with the G90, which I'm very intrigued to use. So there we are. So, you know, batteries, I think these days, price-wise and weight-wise, there are some really good options out there for you to use. This one, by the way, in case you're interested, the 10 amp hour, I think came to about 60 or 70 pounds delivered, okay? Which, okay, you know, it's not cheap, but I think in the long term, if you look after them, they come with a charger. You just plug the charger into the, into the wall, and you plug it into the battery, and hey ho, or attach it to the battery, and hey ho, it'll charge it for you and stop charging when it's ready. So it's all pretty much plug and play, and that usually comes with the charger. I'm not on commission with Ultramax, by the way. Another reason why you'd use perhaps a LiFePO 4 is on the right-hand side. You can see the way that it distributes the power, because with lead-acid batteries, as you probably know, as the blue line on that graph shows, hopefully you can see that, it's general degradation of capacity. And once you get down to about 50% discharge, when it gets to just below 12 volts, then you should really stop using the battery with the lead-acid, because it doesn't do it any favors. With a LiFePO 4, if you look at the red line there, you can see that actually once you get to about 80 or 90% discharge, you're still way above 12.5 volts, and literally just dies right at the end, literally with about 80 to 90, 85, 90% discharge. So they're pretty robust. You don't want to do it all the time, perhaps, but they are pretty robust things to use, and they give you a good range of usage as well in terms of the degree that they last for. So they last longer, and they're lighter, and I think they're a good option. That's what I prefer to use. Now, this is probably where Ken's expertise is going to come in here, because as I mentioned earlier, I am fortunate to live near the sea, and anyone who's operated near the sea may well know that things can get pretty interesting on HF if you can get right next to the seashore. So this is something from the ARRL book, even the handbook for antenna handbook. And basically, if we look at towards the top, you've got Saltwater. And you can see that we've got quite a high conductivity Siemens per meter of 5.0. If you compare that down to about halfway, where we've got pastoral, forestation, it's much more conductive. Now, sort of average ground is where we are there, but we've got the Saltwater, we're going to very good to excellent ground. And if you can get like a vertical antenna near the sea, with just scatter a few ground radials, or in some cases you have what's called a ground tuning unit, where you can use that to not mimic the ground, but create a sort of a ground. Effectively, what you're then doing is getting a really good bit of help from that Saltwater amp. Now, anecdotally, it's been said that sometimes it's up to 10 dB, which is quite a kick. Two things would support that. First of all, a bit of modeling. Now, I know modeling isn't everything, but on the left, you can see the sort of pattern you might expect from a vertical right next to the Saltwater, compared to the right, where we see a pattern from a vertical on sort of average ground. And you can see there that on the left-hand one, the Saltwater one, that we have a lot more gain at those lower angles than we would do in general, compared with the vertical on sort of pasture. People have actually measured the actual impact as well. There's a guy called Greg, N4KGL, who has an absolutely superb video. If you can find him, if you search for, I think it says N4KGL, and he actually did a test where he had two identical vertical antennas for 20 meters. One was right on the sea edge, and the other one was around 700 feet from the sea inland, around 11 wavelengths away. You see from the map there, if you just look at it, there's 2 white dots, one right on the lagoon, one much further inland. So what did he find? Well, when he ran it, he ran whisper tests, simultaneous whisper tests, exactly at the same time. This graph's a little bit busy, but let me just tell you what it means. At the bottom, you've got in yellow shaded from 7 to 14. Now, that's the number of contacts that was simultaneously spotted, and it is the amount of difference that the saltwater antenna had in terms of signal strength compared with the antenna inland. And the average difference for those simultaneous spots was around 10.8 dB. So effectively, near enough 2S units difference between the antenna inland and the antenna which was nearer the sea. What he also did as well was run another test where he compared an antenna which is about 300 feet from the sea with the one by the sea, and it was slightly better. Now, this is on 20 meters, but I think it was within about 5 dB of the one by the sea edge. So I thought that was quite interesting. Obviously, you need to do it more than once, but nonetheless, I think it's quite interesting to see that contrast, which shows that operating by the sea can have its positive effects. So looking at antennas, so I like simple setups. When I go portable, I want to be on the air from the time I arrive within 5 minutes. I absolutely hate messing around with a setup unless I know I've got a good few hours, which is rare. If I've got a 2-hour window to get there and get back, I want to be on the air for the majority of the time, not spending 30 minutes scattering radials here and there or putting this antenna up here. I want to be on the air as quickly as possible, which, okay, it might be a bit greedy, but that's what I like to do. So this antenna I've got here is for 10 meters. And with 10 meters opening up now, it might be a good one to consider. And you've probably made and heard of this before. It's basically the flower pot antenna for 10 meters. It's known colloquially as the T2LT. And I have really enjoyed using this antenna. In fact, I've made versions 15 and 20 as well, and they've worked pretty well. All it is literally, and you can do it in 2 ways. I prefer to use a single length of coax, RG58. If you look at the diagram, hopefully you can see that. The very top of the antenna, the top 2.5 meters, is literally stripped back just to the inner dielectric. So literally just the inside sort of jacket of the antenna. You get rid of the braid as well, all right? And then the bottom half is roughly the same amount, and that is literally untouched. Now, some people prefer, rather than to waste 2.5 meters of coax, they prefer to attach any wire at all to the center conductor of that untouched coax instead of using the rest of the dielectric at the top. It's up to you where you want to go with it. I mean, I don't mind, to be honest. It's just one less thing that can go mechanically wrong as far as I'm concerned. Now, the interesting thing about this antenna is you need to be able to choke off, because you're going to be using some of that common mode to help this antenna to radiate. But what you need to be able to do is to choke off that common mode effectively at the base. Now, to do that, you've got to use what's basically an air-wound choke, which will be pretty much band-specific. It won't be good across more than one band. Hence, these are monoband antennas. So on the left, we've got, I believe it's Steve Hunt. Is it G5TXQ? I hope I've got that call right. I know he's a silent key, sadly, now. But on his website, or a website he's created, he's come up with several examples or several looks at effective choking impedance. And on the bottom right, you'll see basically they were aiming for the greens. We're looking for over 4 or maybe over 8,000 ohms. And you can see there that if you look about halfway down under the words air cord, if you go halfway down, you'll see 5T, that's 5 turns of RG58 on 4¼ inches, 110 mil. So on the right is a very rough version that I put together. All I did was wound about 5 turns of RG58 around some, I think it's sewer pipe, that's about 110 mil, isn't it? And literally taped it all together so it really wasn't going to move. I used so much tape. And effectively that produced the choke. Then you can use any length of coax you want after that, below the choke, as your feed line. And it works splendidly. So to get on 15 meters, for example, you might decide to use, I think it's 7 turns there. Let's have a look. Yes, 7 turns for 15 meters. And if you want to get onto 20 meters, then you're getting hefty here, because it's actually 15 turns. And to be honest with you, that makes it quite big. It's literally like that. It's like this huge thing, which is a lot of weight. So probably a better antenna for the higher bands, maybe 10, 12, 15 meters would be good ideas. And of course, they've always worked well on 2 meters, haven't they, these antennas? And I've used one on 2, and in fact 4 meters as well. And some people use it on 6, I think, as well. So yeah, that works well. It's a very simple antenna. Stick it on a fiberglass pole, and away you go. Probably a 7 meter high fiberglass pole, even 6 meters, as long as it's off the ground, meter or 2 off the ground. In my garden, my postage stamp garden, I've worked Japan, the States, you know, plenty of DX on this thing, literally about 1.5 meters off the ground. So as a vertical, and it does work. But obviously, the higher you get it, the better it's going to perform. And it's a half wave, so it behaves literally like a half wave dipole. That's what it is. Going by the sea, and I know this is something I think Nick mentioned Ken uses, is the good old telescopic whip, 17 foot. Now I'm a cheapskate. Let me just get it for you. I don't use the MFJ one because that's too much money, because I'm from West Wales farming stock, so I don't like spending money, you see. But I did actually splash out on a Moonraker copy, the MRQ 213. Got 3/8 thread there, look. And literally you just pull it out. All right. You can adjust this without a coil for any band from 20 through 10. In fact, you can go from 20 through 4 meters, I think. You can get on 4 meters with it extended. So you can have a 4 meter quarter wave. I think it'll work there. Anyway, worked well. And looking at the pictures on the screen, that was when I went down to the beach about 2 months ago, Sunday morning. Got an idea that up at 5 o'clock, must have been bonkers. And went down there, just attached some radial wires to a little sort of copper rod, which had the mount on it there, as you can see, and attached the radials to it, and had a great time with quite a few VK, ZL, and I think Hawaii as well. So that was good fun. Now you can see that's right by the sea there, and it was really good fun that morning. If only I had more time to do that, because that was really good fun. You can also, if you're looking at monoband, finally, another way you can do monoband that I've done is, well, let me show you. You know, when you look at a vertical, it depends where you feed the thing in terms of what sort of impedance you get. So if you feed it in the middle as a dipole, it's going to be, the textbooks tell you about 73 ohms or something similar. As you go down to the bottom, the impedance goes up. Of course, if you feed it right at the bottom, this is a half wave, by the way. So if you feed this half wave right to the bottom, you're going to have very high impedance, which is why you need to use a 49:1 or something like that. Now, what I've done, actually, if you look at the arrow 1 from the bottom, I fed the vertical 14% from the base, because technically I should give you an impedance of about 450 ohms. So what I did, I used a 9:1 unknown. Now, usually people use 9:1s for multi-band antennas, and they can work okay. But I thought I'd experiment. So what I did, I used a 7 meter fiberglass pole. Looking at the picture there, I put about 4 meters of wire or so above the 9:1 eventually, and about 67 centimeters below it. So the actual 9:1 was about 14 centimeters from the base, and it allowed me to get on 10 meters as a monobander. So actually, if you want to use 9:1 and then as a monoband antenna, you can do that. You probably wouldn't do that very often, because it's really used, isn't it, as a multi-bander. But it gave me a reasonably good SWR. So there we are. And had a bit of fun with that as well. However, I'm greedy, and I do like, really, as much as I can, to use multi-band antennas, because I hate the thought of missing out. So it probably means I'm compromising myself a little bit, but I do like to get on several bands. So when I go portable for an hour or two, I like to be able to band top if I can, whilst trying to maintain a semblance of sort of efficiency across the bands. So one antenna I have played about with a little bit, it's called the Ribicoff antenna. it's actually the Russian for fishermen, even though the antenna was actually, I believe, not sure if it was invented, but it was certainly promoted firstly by an Italian. But there we are. We're all good Europeans. So this is an antenna that's traditionally fed with a 4-to-1 unun at the base. It's about 7.6 meters long. That amount gives you a compromise between giving you still decent low angle radiation on something like 10 meters and not being grossly too short on 40 meters. Now, people say you can use this on 80, but I wouldn't use it on 80, frankly, at that length. But you can use any amount of radials you can from the 4-to-1 unun, and you'll have to use a tuner, preferably nearer, or even really use a remote tuner to actually feed it directly into that rather than use an unun. But it works okay. It is a compromise antenna. Lots of people tend to use them. It seems to come back into vogue recently. A lot of people in the States seem to be using them for parks on the air activations and things like that. But they're a useful sort of multi-band thing to use. You can see the challenge though with an antenna like this. I measured the SWR at the 4-to-1 unun feed point, and you can see that you've got quite a range to deal with. And 40 meters, especially at the top there, you can see is a challenge, especially as the antenna is already quite a bit shorter than a quarter wave. So not the most efficient on 40. It does seem to perform really well on 10, 12, and 15. It tends to have a nice pattern on those bands, but as you go lower down, it starts to tail off. My finding is that basically you're probably losing a fair bit on 40 meters. I think it's going to be at least an S point or two down on a quarter wave vertical on 40. It is a compromise, no question about that. Other things I've used, well, again, I've used a MAT 40 tuner, which I've got back there somewhere. MAT 40, it's a long wire tuner. So I've just basically put about 8.8 meters of wire onto that as a sloper. A sloper to get it over, because I had a car, I had the pole mounted on the car, so I tried to move the wire away from the car, tuner on the ground, some ground radials, and that seemed to work well. And again, tuned very well between 40 and 10. And again, had a bit of fun with that, basically. That worked pretty well. So the only problem is, of course, with those tuners, you have to have a control cable as well. So it's not really something you'd lug up a hill with you. But certainly it's something you could use maybe if you're operating maybe for maybe in a campsite somewhere, or if you're going to be sort of operating for a field day, or you're going to be out and about for a few hours and you're driving up to a location, so you can take your time and get that sort of arranged. But it's not an ideal SOTA arrangement at all with the tuner. You could obviously use a 9-to-1 or something if you wanted to go multi-band with that. Recently, though, and I've always been actually quite a fan of end-fed half waves, which I know will probably split the room, so I'm sorry, but I am a big fan of end-fed half waves. Now, two things about them. First of all, a lot of people seem to think that they're all the same in terms of their design. And by that, I mean the transformer itself. Now, the transformer I use was designed by an excellent guy called Colin. A few of you are probably already subscribed to him. MM0OPX, Colin up in near Glasgow, who is extremely knowledgeable, really good builder of stuff. And he did so much information, so much research into how efficient these transformers could be, especially on the higher bands. And he came up with a design which actually mimics the one from My Antennas in America. It's a 56-to-1 transformer, not your traditional sort of wider, thinner transformer. It's shorter and fatter, and it gives you much better. He measured much better efficiency up on 10 and 15 meters with this transformer, because a lot of 49-to-1s are great on the half wave, great on say 40 and 20 if you've got a 66-foot version, but then begin to suffer efficiency wise on 15 and 10 meters. So this example here I've got is an antenna I built myself, and you probably come across these commercially. It's one for 40, 20, and 10 meters. Now, what I've been doing, excuse the rustling, I'm not sure if you can see me actually, so maybe I can show you this later. But what I've done, I've come up with building inductance coils, basically. And I don't know whether you can see me on the screen, but I'll put it up anyway. This is an example of a 35 microhenry coil. That's a prototype, not a very good version. But for this antenna, I've got it here somewhere. Here it is. You notice I keep all my antennas in food bags labeled, so very with no food as well in it, and sadly. So this is the antenna here. There we go. So it's the 40, 20, and 10 meter one, and I'll show you. There you go. Put that there. So it's all a bit wound up, but that's the 35 microhenry coil. And if you look back at the diagram, most of the wire, about 10 meters of it, goes down to the transformer. That gives you a full wave on 10 meters and a half wave on 20. So 20 especially is where this antenna sings, really. But you also then, above the coil, you've got about just under 2 meters of wire, which will give you 40 meters. And that coil not only loads up 40, it also chokes off 20 and 10, which means that actually that top bit of wire is the only bit that radiates for 40 meters in this antenna. Otherwise, 20 and 10 meters see the coil and stop. So that's why it's quite a clever design. You can make it longer. You don't have to have, you can make that inductance coil slightly less to lengthen the 40 meter thing a bit. I think it's been made because the overall length is 11.8 meters and it fits well onto things like spider beam poles. So a lot of people who sell these commercially, like high-end fed in Holland and a few other places. Palomar used to sell a lot of these in the States. They make this length because it fits those poles, and lots of people use them then for that. And it's useful for, again, a 12 meter pole is heavy, but it's useful again maybe for a portable setup or a small garden setup as well. And of course, I will say this: you don't really need a radial ground with a half wave. You probably need to use the outer sheet for the coax and choke that off, or you could use a counterpoise wire off the ground lug of the transformer, but you don't need an extensive radial field. I'll put that out there. You could adapt that antenna and turn it into a 4-bander if you're getting really, really greedy. So you can add some traps for 10 and 15. It'll reduce the length by about 1.5 meters. And you'll still get 4 bands. 40 meters will suffer a bit. 20 won't be as good. It is a compromise, okay? But if you want to get, basically, it looks like a Frankenstein's monster now, doesn't it? You've got 2 traps and a coil. We don't like traps and coils, I know. But, you know, again, if you want to get one antenna out for a bit of contesting for a laugh or something, it'll get you 4 bands. And again, for about 10.5 meters in length. Antenna I've been playing around with a lot lately, though, is the one you see on your screen there with a 21 microhenry coil, which I've got somewhere and I've mislaid. I might be able to show you that in a minute. Anyway, 21 microhenry coil. And that's what I made there. And basically, what this has allowed me to do is really match up several bands. So recently, I've done 15 and 20 meters portable, about 7 meters in length in total. You can see, if you look at the very top of the antenna there, towards the top, you might catch it. You can see the coil. The bottom of the antenna from the transformer is literally about 6.5 meters long, maybe about 6.5 meters long. Then you've got the coil, and then about 40 centimeters above that, and that gives you 20 meters. So the coil, again, chokes off 15 and allows it to load up 20 meters. So that's a dual bander. Now that's useful because 15 and 20 are not harmonically related. So you don't usually get 15 and 20 off one wire, just those 2 bands off one wire. So it needed to, in order to get these bands that don't harmonically relate to each other with a half wave, end-fed half wave, you can use this coil. You can use this for 17 and 12, 10 and 15, 17 and 20, 21 microhenries might maybe slightly more for 17 and 20, maybe a slightly bigger coil. But you get 2 bands that you wouldn't necessarily have together with one wire running off an end-fed half-wave transformer of that size. So if you don't like contest, you can make your own version of this. And the way you do it literally is to attach the higher band first. So that'll be, for example, this would be 15 meters. Attach the coil to the top of it, prune that wire until you get a tune on 15, and then add a short bit of wire for 20 meters and prune that very carefully, because every centimeter is a big drop. Just don't forget it's loaded until you get a tune for 15 and 20. And what you do to the wire above the coil shouldn't do anything, hardly anything, to the tune you've already got on the longer wire for the higher band. Okay, so that was good fun, and that worked well. I was out with that on Saturday morning, where there was the Asia contest. I came out for an hour, just had a bit of fun, and worked quite a few JAs, quite a few Japanese stations on 15. So that was great fun. Really enjoyed that. Finally, the other thing, of course, the elephant in the room is 40 meters, because we'd all love to put up a long dipole, full-sized dipole for 40 meters and have a bit of fun. But of course, the problem is a lot of the locations we go to, whether it's hilltops or we have to use car parks or even quiet car parks on hilltops, which could be dodgy places, you've got to be careful about sometimes taking up too much space. And it can be a problem. Nothing substitutes a full-sized dipole on 40 meters, especially if you want to work daytime stuff, into G, that kind of thing. It's always going to win. Fairly low inverted V will always do well for you, won't it? But there we are. Now, this is a bit of a wordy bit of information I'm giving you here, but effectively, if say we're looking at into G, we're looking at sort of daytime contacts on 40 meters, the black, on the right-hand side on the diagram, the black line is the dipole. So effectively, at say a high 75-degree elevation, where our signal is going up and coming down on a fairly short hop, a few hundred miles, you get around, it's about 7 dBi, plus 7 dBi. Now, if you compare that to a quarter wave, if you run like a quarter wave, full-size quarter wave vertical, about 60 or 80 meters of radials down, at that high angle, it's minus 9.7. So effectively, you're going to be around 2 to 3 S points down, in theory, on a vertical compared to a dipole. Now, we all know when 40 meters opens up during the day, it opens up. And it doesn't really matter what you're using. You can use a short little whip on the car. You'll still make loads of contacts if into G is really hot. So that's fine. But it's when it becomes marginal that these things make a difference. Lots of people as well, I won't go back to the slide winder and the Mad Dog coil I mentioned earlier. Lots of people use quite short whip antennas with those, say 2 or 3 meter long whip antennas, which is fine. But when you go down to 40 meters, there's an even bigger compromise. So if you go out in the day and wanted to work into G on 40 with one of those, then you're going to be another 12 dB down on the quarter wave. So in fact, you're quite a bit down on the vertical. But again, if the conditions aren't marginal, then you can basically get away with a lot doing that. So if we're just looking at this very crudely, let's say, for example, we've got 100 watts on an inverted V dipole, and we're putting out an S9 signal at the top. If we, in theory, knock that down to 5 watts, probably going to be about S7. That quarter wave vertical running 100 watts, again, this is at the high angles here, by the way. You're looking at high angles sort of into G stuff, okay? With a quarter wave vertical running 100 watts, you're going to be about S6. So what strikes me about that is that, and I'd love to do a test on this, by the way, and one or two of you may well have done this, but is it the case, therefore, that perhaps a quarter wave vertical running 100 watts for short skip stuff isn't going to be that much better than an inverted V dipole running something like 5 watts? Don't know, it's an interesting one to see. But you'll notice when you go down to the 2 bottom ones, the shortened vertical, even if you're running a 2.5 meter long base loaded vertical with loads of radials down with 100 watts, you're still going to be appreciably down on even the quarter wave vertical and certainly on a dipole, even on a dipole running much less power because of that higher angle energy that you'll get better performance with a dipole. And of course, if you run QRP with a shortened vertical on 40 meters, then okay, you are certainly presenting probably a challenge to yourself. Finally, the final thing is something I'm going to be using shortly, and I've actually made it already, again, in one of my wonderful bags. This is an L doublet for 40 through 10 meters. Now, again, why an L shaped? Well, I thought about saving space. And I've actually gone for a non-resonant doublet here. Now, this is something, again, you'll probably need to set up when you're sort of car portable. But you can do a half-size version of this, perhaps for 20 and 10 meters that you can use. Now, with this antenna, both legs are about 7.2 meters long. So it's kind of a half-size G5RV size antenna. What I want to do with this is run one leg as a vertical and the other leg to slope down as a horizontal. Now, after looking at this, it's become apparent, I think, that that lower leg would probably need to be slightly shorter than the upper leg to make the antenna balanced because of this capacity, its capacitive relationship with the ground. So it needs to be slightly shorter, but that's by the by. What I'm thinking of doing, what I have done is, I don't know if you can see this, I'll get it out of the bag. I've got 300 ohm ladder line attached to this antenna. So effectively, a bit of 300 ohm. And that, well, ordinarily would go into a tuner, but because I bought the much fabled G90, which apparently can tune a wet noodle up to 10 to 1, so I've been told, and lots of people have demonstrated it actually, I'm thinking of doing perhaps the idea of just attaching that ladder line to a short choke and then running literally that choke straight into the back of the G90. So that might be an option anyway, to try it, take out one less bit of kit. Now you could half size this for 20 and 10 meters. You could have maybe 3.5 meters, 3.5 meters, or 4 meters and 4 meters. And you could put it on a 6 meter pole. So identically, you could actually use this as a fairly, short antenna, which will give you a few bands. In terms of how it performs, we're looking at its high angle elevation performance, like the one we just looked at earlier. It's kind of averages out at minus 2.2 dBi. So actually, it's about an S point up on a quarter wave vertical, but still about a couple of S points down on a low dipole. Because that lower leg, the horizontal leg, is acting a little bit like a dipole. So hopefully that might help in terms of creating a bit of an all-round antenna for 40 meters. And also above, it's got some nice gain and some nice low angle performance on the higher bands as well. Right, that's enough of me rabbiting on. There we are. So I hope that's given you some thought. And if you're still awake, then I'll be happy to take any questions. I'll stop the share, and there we are. So yeah, I'm back in the room. Back to you, Nick. I'll shut up now.
Absolutely superb, Tim. Really, really good presentation. And I know, just looking at some of the members we've got in the club here, a number of people are looking at this thinking, do you know, that will solve one of the problems in my back garden? Because obviously what you've described for portable operating could as well, of course, work in your home location as well. And, although there are one or two people amongst those in the room here who have got superb ground at home, hundreds of feet and space to put up all kinds of antennas. Actually, most people don't have that in the UK for sure, certainly in England, and anyone who lives in a city, of course. It's very, very unusual for people to have those size of gardens, and modern houses are the plague of us all because they're even smaller than all those. So looking for antennas that operate in those places is a good thing. And I was just thinking about your journey, before I throw it out of the room, I was just thinking about your journey, Tim, about what you started off with. And I can remember when I first started operating portable, and I went and got one of the Sota Beams inverted V dipoles with the clips in, crocodile clips in to change the bands on it. They call it the band hopper, don't they? And I took a 40-meter one on a campsite in France, and with a pole. And of course, there was no way there was enough space to put a 40-meter dipole up on the space where I had my tent. I ended up running some of the wire for the 40 meters around the hedging on the area around where my tent was. Anyway, I did manage, believe it or not, to work ZL early one morning on 40 meters using that very, very compromised 40-meter inverted antenna. But it's the size of it is the problem. And you're quite right. What you described, go in a car park, go down by the seaside somewhere, go in a park somewhere. You're going to struggle to find the space to put up that antenna. So looking for that smaller antenna, and I think up here in Yorkshire and up in the Northern Hills, and we're not alone in this, Tim, when you said there's an alternative to the MFJ 17-foot telescopic whip. We've been buying them from AliExpress for about £12 each. And to be perfectly honest, they are absolutely perfectly decent telescopic whips to use. The only problem, as you described it, I looked at your one on top of the car and I thought there was no wind when you were doing that at all. Even when I go up in the hills behind me here, and mind you, we do get some decent winds up in the Pennines. I've now made myself a little 3 pieces of string, it's not string of course, to support it, just to stop the thing being blown over by the wind, because they are very they pick up anything, and are a problem. But what you described there is a journey that a number of us have been through. I know you referenced Ken earlier. I'm sure you'll come in on the discussion, Tim, but it's a journey a number of us have been through over the years, and we've all got our favourites. But I have to say to you, just pick up one comment you made there. I'm absolutely with you. The key thing when you get somewhere is you want to be operating as quickly as possible. You don't want to be mucking around with 40 radials that you're trying to string out on the ground. You don't want to be mucking around with enormous poles and guying them and then, getting up all this kit there. I learned my lesson on that. She can't hear me because she's in the other room, but my wife and I, for about 20 years, have gone over every December or January to the German-Austrian border, stayed with a family there, and we've gone out walking in the mountains, which are fabulous. And I've always done a bit of portable operating. The problem with that is that it's so bloody cold because you're standing in 3 feet of snow, and it's very cold the higher up the mountains you go. You really don't want to be up there very long. And I can tell you, my wife doesn't want to be up there very long, waiting for me to make a few contacts on the radio. So we all have ways of doing that. But I'm absolutely certain everyone watching you tonight who goes out running portable stations at some time wants to do it as simply as possible. If you can get away with no ATU, brilliant. If you can get away with as few radios or none or two or something, brilliant. Get it up and running in 5 minutes. That's the holy grail. So hats off to you, Tim, on that. But I'm sure you're right. Let's chuck it out to the room. Who wants to ask a question, make a contribution to Tim? And Rachel, would you mind just helping me out? Because I'm trying to look at the whole room here, and we've got quite a few people on. Just give me a hand with letting me know when someone's got their hand up. Ken, you go first, Ken. You did get checked by Tim, and you've got tons of experience. So over to you, Ken.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, well, just want to say to Tim, that was brilliant. Tim, I've never met you, but I've listened to a lot of your videos, and that was excellent, and you covered quite a lot of ground. All I wanted to do was just mention a couple of points to add to Tim's presentation, if that's okay. Tim, you mentioned about getting away portable. Yeah, fantastic, because you get away from the buildings, get away from built-up areas. It's much quieter, whether you're on a hilltop or by the sea. I made a few notes. I'm just looking at my notes. Don't be afraid to use vertical antennas in small gardens. I've got a full-sized quarter wave for 40 meters, and I can work into Japan most evenings on it, and Victor Kilo. But the thing you've got to remember is make sure you put some form of common mode choke on it. It'll stop RF feedback. Not that you should get any, but it will, and it will make it much quieter on receive. And if you haven't got one and you can't make one, ferrite beads for your selected coax. And obviously remembering that the beads are larger for things like for coax like RG213, as different to your RG or your 58 U type coax. Tim, you mentioned about marginal conditions on when it's like on 40. I've done some experimenting with a very low 21 feet above ground. I class that as low. 40-meter dipole, but I weren't happy just putting a dipole up. I knew it would be envious, but I thought I'll put a reflector below it. And I put the reflector at 0. Well, I think it's 1.2 for the correct spacing, which is round about 13 foot below it. What a difference. So for 2 pieces of wire running down the edge of my garden, for Envis working on 40, which basically is really good, into G, into European working, signals were 40 and 50 dB over 9 and so quiet. You mentioned the Rybakov or Rybakov. Yeah, you're right about your description of who invented it. The only thing I don't like, and I've done a lot of experimenting, the only thing I don't like about a Rybakov, and I know that I think Mike and Adrian's got a Rybakov and done some work with it, is that the initial SWR, the initial matching is terrible. I mean, we're talking of SWRs of 18-1, 25-1. And it is a compromise. But for anyone that's not got much space, the Rybakov's okay for working several bands. Working by the Saltwater, everyone asks the question, why is it better? And it's better because of the salts within the water, the sodium, the chloride, the magnesium, the potassium, the salinity of it is so good that the RF generated from the antenna connects to it like it connects to a perfect ground plane. So it's like having a sheet of copper around the base of the antenna, and it's pulled, it's attracted to it. And it's just fabulous. So for anybody that's not done it, if necessary, if you can, buy a Chinese copy of the telescopic whip for £13 and go out, put one radial out if that's all. In fact, throw it in the salt of the salt water and see what happens. You will be amazed. And with that, Tim, thank you very much. It's been brilliant and fully enjoyed it. Back to you, Nick.
Yeah, Tim, do you want to comment on Ken's comments there?
Yeah, I'd love to. Ken, thank you very much for coming back with those. I was keen to hear your thoughts on some of that, and interested about the reflector on that dipole. I'll be looking to do that, I think. I haven't got an antenna up at the QTH at the moment, but a 40-meter dipole is one of those things you always fling up because there's always something happening on 40 meters. So I'll definitely be looking to do that. So that's very interesting, Ken. Thank you. And yes, I know regarding your experiences of operating by the sea, I know full well you have absolutely fantastic results with that on a every time you go out. So it's great to hear what you think about that. So thank you, Ken. That's great to hear you. Thank you very much, and thanks for your kind words. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, Tim and Ken. Who else has got a comment or contribution they want to make? Right, I've got Bob, first of all, in Scotland, and then I've got John, 2E0JJC. Yeah, Bob, over to you first.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. Fascinating presentation, Tim. Really very interesting. You've gone into all sorts of different antennas, and my passion is exactly the same as yours and Ken's, which is operating right by the sea. And I do mean right by the sea. In fact, I mean basically in the sea. And you, if you're around next month, I'm going to be giving the talk to this club on my experiences with doing that, but not from here, from the Tasman Sea. It'll be about all going to Norfolk Island, Lord Howe Island, the Chatham Islands, Tasmania. And the goal was to try and work back to the G. However, I'd already played around with 20 meters right by the sea some years ago. And I thought this time when I went out there, I'd be looking at the hard stuff, which was 40 and 80. And what I'm going to develop is the same sort of things you've been doing, but resonant antennas. I've not looked at any form of multiband ones for 40 and 80, but not just single elements, 2-element arrays. And it's really sort of kind of similar to what you and Ken are doing, but with a slightly different slant. You're so right, Nick, about you need to make something that's simple. I didn't. Mine were terribly complicated, and you'll find all about the burps and farts next month. But absolutely fascinating. But I was going to ask you, you put up a couple of easy neck plots there. I guess you're aware that on easy neck, you can define different regions of the ground for different conductivities.
Now, I have to say, I actually use MMANA, so I'm
Okay.
using the
Right.
junior school version of modeling, not the senior school one. So no, I that is something I need. That's on my list to do, is to get my head around easy neck. So no, I didn't realize that. That's interesting.
Well, you can simulate an antenna, any antenna, right by the edge of the sea by defining one part of the ground as sea, and on the other side of the antenna as sand or rock or whatever it is you want, using the conductivities that you showed in your slide. And when you do that, it's a revelation in terms of, in fact, a simple vertical right by the sea, I mean, literally by the sea, as a front to back, a huge front to back. It turns it into a beam. And when you start playing around with that, it's absolutely fascinating. I spent so many hours just messing with EasyNeck, and that was the revelation to me, which adds a lot more sort of data in terms of polar diagrams and things like that to what you've been doing. And I can't agree with you and Ken more. It's a fascinating thing. And here's the thing I've discovered. You don't actually need radials for verticals when you're right near the sea. All will be revealed in a month's time. But absolutely wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You're a man after my own heart. Well done. Keep up the good work.
Oh, that's really kind of you, and thank you. And I have to say, I've always suspected, because you're by the sea, how many, do you need that radial system that you'd need inland?
No,
that's
you don't.
really interesting. So are you going to be covering that in the next? You're going to be going through that the next time we gather.
Yes.
Is that right?
And you don't need it for 2-element beams either. It's absolutely fascinating.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I'll make a point of. I might have to join this club now. You said that. You talk about it. Is he on commission? No, brilliant. I'm looking forward to that. So I'll drop in on that. Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for your kind comments. And
wonderful presentation.
Really looking forward to hearing what you've discovered. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob. John, over to you.
Great presentation, Tim. Tim, what I'm interested to know is what your views on Faraday cloth.
Now that's become very much the in thing in the States, isn't it? With POTA, or should I say POTA? Now I know the magic. Is it called the magic carpet antenna? Isn't it? I'll be honest. I find it quite hard to source in this country. I don't know whether other people have looked at it. Now I did actually get a link sent to me by a friend about a week ago. He said, "Why haven't you done this video yet?" I said, "Well, I couldn't find it," and he gave me a link. So yes, I will try it. I mean, there has been a couple of videos. I think the guy KB9VBR, is it Michael? The guy who sells the J-pole antennas. He does a lot of videos in the States about parks on the air and stuff like this. Now he was the one, I think, who brought it to people's attention on YouTube. I think he did some testing. It might have been Whisper with a friend of his. And I believe they came to the conclusion that a piece of Faraday cloth, about, how long was it? About, say, 4 foot by 8 foot or something, had the same sort of performance, in inverted commas, as a ground-mounted vertical quarter wave with, say, 8 quarter wave radials. Now, don't know about that. I mean, why would you use? I suppose it's easier to transport than wires. I suppose there's that about it. You just need to keep it down on each corner with a stone or something, or a log, which are probably more plentiful in American parks than they are in British parks. I don't know. It's probably worth a go. I think it'll be good to try it with some really, have that antenna and a quarter wave with, say, some radials down, and just see some like the guy did in America with what I mentioned, with some simultaneous testing to see how these two antennas get out. I don't know. I'm trying not to think it's a gimmick, but it might work. And I don't know whether anybody else here has actually tried it. And I'd be happy to hear what they think. But it's one of those that needs to be proven, I think. Whether it's just a bit of a fad or whether it's something that can really do well, I'm not sure. It depends a lot, I guess, on the conductivity of the cloth that you use. I think that can vary. So I think you've got to be careful about the quality of the Faraday cloth that you use as to whether or not that will give you a sufficient and a sufficient attempt to try and mimic what a sort of a usual sort of quarter wave would do with some radials under it. What do you think, John? Have you tried it yourself, or is that something
I've actually got one, but I've not tried it yet. I think I've gone overboard. Most people are buying, I think it's 10 foot by about 4 foot wide sections. I thought 3, and I took it down to a local sewing shop and said, stitch those together. So I've got a 10 foot by 10 foot piece. What I've done with it, bearing in mind the wind problems, I've got some fishing weights in the corners, and then is a simplistic way of putting it out, because as you're putting it down, the wind gets on the other side and starts lifting it up again. I just stand in the middle by the quarter wave antenna and chuck these weights out, basically, and that gets it down on the ground. So, but I've not used it yet in earnest at all. Just finished it off now. So I don't know. But yeah, you're right. A lot of people in the States are starting to use them. You see them on their videos, and they seem to use one strip, where I went maybe overboard with 3. But I look at the logic is, you start putting ground radials out, say 4 or 5 meters or something like that, short ones, and people are saying, yeah, put more down, until finally you've got thousands of them then. And then you've got a Faraday cloth, haven't you, really? Which is reacts like a solid sheet.
Well, I guess in terms of portability, it's easier to take around with you. Good on you for doing that, by the way. That is brilliant. I'm really interested to see how you get on with it. How are you going to how are you going to mount the vertical? Are you going to get on some sort of tripod, or are you going to stick? How is that going to work for you? How
So stick it in a hole straight through the middle. I thought about doing very clever professional things like eyelets and things like this, but I came to the conclusion with that stuff, because liquid will go through it, because it's thousands of metallic things, together, basically, wires. So what I did, I just punched a hole in it, pierced a hole in it, and then run super glue around the hole, and that stops it from fraying.
That's
and
all.
I shove the earth spike straight through the middle of it, and you've only got to put a bolt through it,
right?
And then you can connect any radials to the bottom of the grounding on the antenna, just with a croc clip. Everything you touch on there is, you put a meter on it, and there is ohms, all over the place.
Wow.
John,
sorry, go on.
John, why not use a ground tuning unit and don't use any radials at all? Radials away.
I've just purchased a Mat 40 following watching Tim's one of his YouTubes, and yeah, I may throw that one in as well.
Ken, that's great, John. So can I ask briefly about that ground tuning unit, Ken? I know it's a whole different thing. Are there any commercial ones available, or is that going to be a homebrew, Ken?
There are 2 commercial ones available, an MFJ 931 and an MFJ 934. They will handle 300 watts, which you don't need. You only need about 70 or 50 watts if you're near the sea. And provided you've got an earth bus, which in my case is a trolley, when I go out, and connect the trolley to the ground tuning unit, or you can make a ground tuning unit, which is an inductor series tuned with a variable capacitor, and force the RF current to ground. Well, I mean, most people on here know what, that I've mentioned this before, but all you're doing is mimicking your quarter wave vertical on the that's connected to your trolley. So you've got the reflector, the reflecting part of it, capacitively coupled to ground. And that's why if you use a plastic sheet under a trolley or under a tripod, then let me just turn that off. If you use a plastic sheet, you get a good capacitive coupling to ground. But a ground, I've got one here, I just can't find it. I was leaning over to try and find it, but I've got one here that's a spare one that I don't use. An MFJ931 or an MFJ934.
Brilliant, thank you. I always wondered whether there were some commercial ones, so and that's a useful one. Thank you. Thanks, John, and you know, good luck with that. And I'd love to hear how you get on with it. So can you let me know how you get on with that when you first use it? That sounds really good.
Will do. Cheers.
Yeah, I think we're all fascinated actually, John, because I'm the same as Tim. I've been reading these guys in America with this using these Faraday carpets and thinking, really, is that going to be any better than a few radials, and is it going to transform the way you're working? So I'm not alone and I'm sure other people in the room want to do that. Right, I've got a pile of people, so I'm going to take you one by one. I've got Terry first, I've got Bob, and I've got George. So let's go with Terry first.
Is that the VFC?
It is Terry VFC, yeah.
Yeah, just thinking about this Faraday cloth and the fact that you like to be by the sea. Why not take a king-size bed sheet, soak it in salt water, and lay it down in place of the Faraday pound sinker?
Well, it's an interesting idea. I don't know. Do you mean to actually soak it in the actual sea water?
Soak in whatever salt water source you've got. If it's in the sea, that's great. And if it's if you've got to take a large bucket of salt water and the bed sheet in it, so be it. I mean,
That's interesting, isn't it?
It might just work.
Yeah, that's interesting. Ken, what do you think? Because you've got more experience of the seaside than me. Do you think that might be a goer?
I think it won't be a goer, and the reason it may be insofar as it will enhance the signal a little bit, but it won't be in real terms because your signal is radiated many wavelengths out from the antenna, at least 2 to 3 wavelengths. So on 20 meters, you're talking 180 meters, and you can't. There's no bed sheet 180 meters square or whatever shape.
No, that is true, but equally, the Faraday sheet, which has cost you multiple pounds, is just as small.
I think those Faraday sheets are good for VHF and UHF radio working, to put as an additional magnetic mount on the car roof, provided your car roof's not aluminium like mine, and then you can't do it.
I have a feeling that it's a way of extracting money from those who wish to spend it.
Not in this hobby, surely. Come on.
I've got Bob, N4XAT. Go ahead, Bob.
First of all, I used to live by the sea. If you just took a radio and you threw the radio into the sea, that's all you have to do. The Faraday shield isn't going to help you. On the other hand, I've also used the Faraday shield, but not by the sea. When I went to West Virginia during our last go-around, first thing that I noticed is, like John said, I ran into problems because as you're trying to lay it, it doesn't matter how light the breeze is, the Faraday shield is so light that it blows it up. So what I did, I put grommets in mine. I put 3 grommets on each side and then 1 grommet in the center. I just have one. I don't have one as large as John's. And I held it down first of all, I tried tent stakes, but I decided they were too big. So now I do is I don't know what size they are, but they're huge nails that I use to hold it down, and that works fine. And if you mount a vertical, say right in the center of and I think mine is 4x10. I think that's what it is. And put the vertical in the center of it, and it for travel it's great because you it's lightweight. You don't have to worry about wrapping up a whole bunch of radials and then stringing them out. It's once you figure a way to mount the Faraday shield on the ground, it works. I didn't compare it against radials, so I can't say whether I got as good a gain. I don't know, but I made contacts. I was using a 705, and I was using it at well, what is it, 5 watts that runs off of a battery, 7 watts, something like that, and it served its purpose. I made several contacts, mostly in CW because that's usually what I use, and they were a good distance within the United States. So that's my opinion. And Tim, while I have your ear, I worked you back in March, a POTA from South Downs.
Right.
But you gave me a 5.2, but it never showed up in the POTA listing.
Right. I'll check that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that was on the 20th of March at about 15:48, 15:49. If you have the logs yet, it isn't critical because I have over 1,000 POTA. I'm a hunter. I don't walk very much anymore, so I'm a hunter. But I have over 1,100 now parks, and thank you for that contact. Whether it shows up there or not, I appreciate it.
Wow.
That day you said you were South Downs. You were on 0265 plus 2.
That's the one. That's the only one I've actually activated so far. So that's the one.
Right?
That's my favorite spot up there.
Yeah.
That's when I showed a couple of photos for the 15 and 20 meter half wave earlier. That's where I was on Saturday. That's my favorite spot. So yeah, I'll check the log, my friend, and I'll try and get that sorted for you. Okay.
Yeah, and like I say, it's not critical. It's not critical, but you know, if you find it, and there's another call sign out there, and I believe it's November 4 X-ray Tango maybe. It's something very similar to mine, and he's just as active as I am. So people confuse the two of us a lot, and you can tell that because they'll say good morning and they'll give the other fella's name, or they'll give my name to the other fella. You know.
No problem, mate. I'll check that. I've got it logged. I'll have it logged in N1MM on my laptop. So I'll. That's probably the log I haven't put up to POTA. So I'll do that, and I'll make sure you get that one. It's great to work you anyway. So thank you very much for doing that.
I think that'll give me 6 British parks, I believe, and that's mostly all QRP.
Fantastic. You're operating from QRP at home yourself, are you? Is that right?
Mostly QRP. I cheat now and then, and when there's one out there that I really want, then I'll go higher. But most of them are QRP. Yes.
Oh well done.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun.
Yeah, it is fun. Thank you, and I'll check that. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. George, I've got you, and then I've got Jeff and Roger with a couple of comments in the chat to put to Tim. So over to you, George.
Okay, thanks very much, Tim, for a very interesting presentation. Lots of food for thought there. I'd like to do more portable operation anyway because I've got such high noise levels at home. But I live in the Midlands, so it's going to be a 2 or 3 hour drive in any direction for me to get to the ocean. So you talked a lot about how you don't need radials here by the ocean, by the seaside, but obviously if I go out locally, inland, I probably still need radials. And you mentioned about 40 meters of radials, but what sort of configuration do you use, or would you think works well? Is it just 1 or 2 long ones, or many short ones, or how do you? Yeah.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I've went on a rabbit hole about 2 years ago with verticals because I'm one of these people who, once he has a bit of time on his hands, which isn't often, I tend to look at. I've got one of these minds like to obsess about stuff. So there's a guy called Rudy Sevens, N6LF, who's done so much work on radials and the effective ground radials. Yeah. He's come to the conclusion, I think, that basically lots of smaller radials tends to give you a little bit better performance than fewer longer ones. I think because it prevents more of an immediate screen around that high current point at the base of the quarter wave. So if you're using a quarter wave, the more immediacy of wire or metal you have around that feed point, the high current point, a little bit better it'll help. In terms of how many you need, well, I said 40 meters because I would say probably that I would use, let's just think, I would probably use 2.5 meter or maybe 3 meter long radials, about 4 in a bunch. So I'd probably use maybe 4 bunches of those. It'd be about 40 to 48 meters of radials, right? So something like that. And I'd have 4 bunches of radials, no more than about 3 meters long, and probably about 4 of them in the bunch, something like that. Now, certainly from 20 and up, if you're in sort of average ground, pastoral ground, like you probably will be, it'll be just fine. You're not going to get much more by doubling those amount of radials. And that's what Rudy Sevens found. Yeah. 40 meters, you might want to put a bit more down on the ground. But to be perfectly honest with you, I think from a portable aspect, that probably suffices. Because at the end of the day, as we said earlier, you want to get on the air. And if you've got like a 2-hour window to get on the air, you don't want to spend an extra 15, 20 minutes putting an extra few radials down for an extra half a dB gain. You know, it's diminishing returns. So I would say 40 meters of radials, 4 bunches, say 4 radials in a bunch, 3 meters long each, 12 meters, say 3 or 4 of those, 48 meters of radials, job done. That's what I've done. Others may come in with something different because they've had different experiences, but I found it hasn't really made much difference for me doing much more than that. So
that makes sense. Thank you. And then just basically connect them up by a croc clip or
yeah. What I've done, I haven't got it here. You can get those. I forgot what they're called now, but you can go to Screwfix or something like that. Any DIY shop, and you've got these. Somebody will know the answers to this. They've got the strips of metal you can basically join like that. So you've got like the right angle ones and the straight ones with the with holes already in them. For I think for what sort of size you're looking for, maybe M6 screws and bolts you can put in there. If you could join those together, you can make your own little radial plate. And now they're not stainless, so they're not great quality. But if you buy like a packet of, you can make loads of them, little radial plates. And what you then do is basically put nuts and bolts into that, wing nuts, 4 connectors, attach the radials to maybe 3 or 4 of those, and then you attach the ground side to your coax with one of the other ones as well. So that way you get the ground radial plate. You can do it like that. There's other ways to do it as well, but I find that's quite an easy way to do it, to be honest with you. And it's quite easy to transport around with you as well, because you can just fold it up and just put it away.
Okay, thanks very much.
That's no problem. Thank you. Good luck.
My answer to that, Tim, was the Wago connectors that electricians use on the cabling. And I've got one for 5 outputs on it, and it's got little levers that you push down just to push the cables in. So like you, I use 4 radials. So I've got one of them connected up to my earthing for the base of my antenna. And then I've got the other 4 ones. I just literally have got pieces of wire stripped off at the end. You shove them in, clip down the lever, and job done.
And of course, they're all connected together. They're
all connected together at that kind of all together in one point like that. And they cost, about 40p for about 4 of them. It's ridiculously cheap and simple.
That is a really good idea, because otherwise the only thing you could do is use the old the chock block connectors, but that becomes a faff because you then got to screw things in.
Then a screwdriver, faff. I've done that. Or as you say, you end up with a piece of metal and wing nuts. That's a faff as well. Just having pieces of wire that you just literally clip it in, push down the lever, job done.
Well, that's a fantastic idea. I might try that. So thank you very much. I'll give you a shout for that one. So thank you. Brilliant.
Right. I've got Jeff, ON8NT, on the chat, who said, what about using a tuned elevated radial?
Now then, are we talking about one like an L shape, or are we talking about using a couple of two? Doesn't matter really, does it? Are we talking about like an L-shaped antenna, or are we talking about like a ground plane with two tuned radials?
I think Jeff, if you come in on the chat because his microphone's not working, I think that was in reference to the vertical antenna you were talking about. So instead of having a ground radial, what about a tuned elevated radial? Because there is obviously a difference between them.
So I mean, if for example, yes, that would work. And again, what studies have shown, going back to Rudy Sevens as well, was basically if you've got, for example, a ground plane, so you've got like a vertical and two tuned radials, basically 180 degrees from each other. So you've got like a not fairly omnidirectional pattern to the antenna, if that's what you want to do. Two of those, more than say a meter or so off the ground is fine. And that will give you the same sort of performance as probably something like 8 or 16 quarter wave radials. So tuned radials above the ground, they're more of a faff to actually do portable because you've got to keep the ends off the ground. I have used, you know, those electric fence, little electric fence posts you can buy, the plastic ones with a spike at the bottom, you just put them in a dead light. They're only about like a meter tall. You can put one of those in either side and then just run the radials to those and tie them off those. So that could be an option, especially if you're on the beach and you've got like, you know, reasonable sand to put them in. But the performance-wise, yes, tuned radials will be as good as quite a few ground radials, definitely. It's just a case of whether you have the space to effectively have a full half wave, because there'll be a quarter wave that side and a quarter wave that side. It's all about whether you have the horizontal space to do it. Whereas with ground radials, you take up much less horizontal space because you can use shorter radials and more of them on the ground. But they do work really well. Elevated radials do a good job. Of course, they need to be tuned, as you say.
Okay, and Roger G4UFZ was just asking, can't you just connect the ton or more of steel you arrived in the ground and save some time? I think he's talking about your car.
Oh, well, now it's funny you should say that, because one thing I have tried and one thing I'm going to do again is I had this idea once, you're going to laugh. That antenna I showed you had the sloping wire going down to the tuner. I had this wonderful idea to take a 12-meter pole out with me, attach the wire to, say, the 11-meter point quite near the top, and then angle it down to the tuner. But I put the tuner on the car roof, right? So I put the tuner on, this is the MAT 40 tuner now, the long wire tuner. So I put it on the car roof. I put a little bit of something underneath so it didn't scratch the car too much. And then, you know, ran the control cable in. But what I also did is that to the ground lug of the tuner, this is probably not a great way to do it, I attach one of those little diamond mats that you can buy that you can put on a mag mount to improve your capacity, your capacitive ground. There's little things you can buy. So I attached that to the ground lug of the tuner. It worked really well, except when the wind started and I was on the air, I noticed at the corner of my eye in the car, my tuner swinging majestically just by the side of the driver's window. And I thought, better get out and sort that one out, because we've got a problem here. So what I've gone and done now, and this is the really mad bit of it, I thought, what can I use? I could use sandbags to weigh this tuner down so it doesn't do that. But I thought, no, I haven't done that. I was in Tesco's one day, as you are, completely lost, and I saw these big bags of long grain rice. So I'm literally using two of these bags on top of the tuner and it weighs it down. So there you go. I mean, completely mad. This is the things we do. So I might call it the Uncle Ben's antenna instead and see how that goes on. Hey, what goes through our minds? Since you become a ham, the one thing you do when you walk into any shop, you always look out for stuff that could be useful to act as a tie some wires up or act as a connector, anything unorthodox. I walk around so places like Home Bargains and B&M, which are quite, you know, the budget shops in the UK, and I always look at the home section. What's that there? Can I use that? It's such an obsession. I'm telling you, it's so sad, but there we go.
Yeah, go on, Bob.
Yeah, I think
it's about an obsession.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to just a little bit on what you just said, Tim. I know exactly what you mean. And here, this is how obsession you can get. I had to replace the kitchen hob. The old one had just died, and I thought, well, I'll replace it rather than get an electrician to do it. And when I'd taken the old one out, I looked at the actual construction of each hob underneath it. This is not a ceramic hob; it's the usual one with wires, and it's a helix, obviously. And I'm sure you've looked at them. It's not just straight wire. There's all in a zigzag like that. And I looked at this and I thought, I wonder what the total length of wire is in one of these tuning things. So I sat down, did a bit of maths, right, rather than measure it, and worked it out. And in a kitchen, a normal kitchen hob heating element, there is enough wire there to give you a quarter wave on 40 meters, right? There's 10 meters. So I thought, hang on, I've got two of these from the hob. What if I put them on a short pole and put them on up to about 10 meters and have a brilliant, really small 40-meter dipole? I mean, how daft can you get?
That's inspirational. I tell you, it just creeps up and you don't realize, doesn't it? It's just mad. It really is. That's a great example.
Roger, you were trying to get back in again.
Yeah, just to comment, thanks, Tim. My point was that you're talking about Faraday sheets. The car is essentially bigger than an 8x4 sheet of metal, whichever way you slice it. And your idea is to start with a mag mount on the roof. You would get a better connection to the ground if you just connect the chassis of the car to the ground. And a lot of people do this for anti-static purposes. Just one bit of bolted inside the engine bay, spike into the ground. You need a bit of copper or something deep, but you get a good connection there. And I just wonder what the difference is between your 8x4 sheet that you're laying on the ground and your ton of metal you've arrived in. You've got it there. You're traveling in it. Why not use it?
That's a really good suggestion. I don't know if anybody else has had any thoughts about this, but it sounds really something to think about.
Feedback from
Have you tried that yourself, Roger?
No, I've not tried it, but you just know intuitively that the chassis of the car is essentially all connected together. I mean, okay, you might have a challenge on an aluminium roof like Ken, but the rest of us with cheapo cars with steel roofs, you can put a mag mount on the roof. But inside the engine bay, you'll be able to find some place to bolt a wire on to bare metal, and then you've got a good ground connection. Now, I know connecting to ground, as in ground, is technically sometimes difficult. You have to go very deep or very wide or something. But you've just talked about an 8x4 sheet, not connected to ground. It's just laid on the ground. Your car is bigger than an 8x4 sheet before you've started. So I don't know what benefit you're going to get other than your car. Beyond your car, what's the 8x4 sheet going to give you? Other than it's more portable. But if you're talking drivability, you've just rocked up in a ton of metal. Use the ton of metal as your ground plane, as your starting point for your ground plane. Anyway, that was my comment about the 8x4 sheet.
I think that's something to bear in mind. I think that's a really useful suggestion. Thank you, and I think that's something to look at. Again, a good experiment there, I think. And you're right, because I've got an older car. I got a Mondeo, and the Mondeos are big old metallic things. And I'll be honest, I'm quite spoiled because actually, for what I get away with, frankly, with a mag mount with one of those is I can get a tune on anything on HF, which is frankly silly. I shouldn't. So older cars are great like that. But that's a really good suggestion. Thank you. And something to bear in mind. So that's another one to add to my list now. Thank you very much. I'll look into that. Thank you.
Yeah, it'd be easy to do a comparison once you just unplug it, plug it. For an ad hoc experiment, it'd be a very simple thing to try.
Absolutely. If you can unplug it and plug in real time, then clearly you'll get that real time impact. Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Don't know if anyone can hear me, but
yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, got some. Looks like we've got some internet problems here. Before we finish, anyone else got any questions or comments they want to put to Tim?
Howard.
Yes, go on, Howard.
Right, I've
just got a couple of comments to make. That was all. I thought very interesting, Tim. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot tonight. One thing in particular I was thinking about, my garden. I've got a wonderful garden. It's 25 feet by 25 feet. So yeah. And commented, the other comment was, when I used to go down to Spain, like Ken, until COVID, we used to go for 5 months down into Spain to a particular campsite, which had a lovely palm tree adjacent to the parking lot that I always used to use. And I had a your extendable plastic pole with 10 meters of wire up through this and lean it into the tree. And the counterpoise was the chassis of the caravan. I used to wind it round the A-frame on the caravan and earth spike it. Worked the world from there with the 100 watts. Simple thing that just, I mean, I belong to another technical club like this one, and the guys there, Bob knows what you're talking about. But the guys there, they're all into computers and and they haven't really understood any of the principles. You know, you don't need to. I mean, I worked as a campsite warden basically, so all over Britain. You go to a campsite, you have a piece of wire, you throw it in a tree, you counterpoise it some way, it'll work. But these guys with all the computers, they need all the fancy stuff. Anyway, that'll do for me. Thank you very much, guys. Lady next door said time to come, so I shall go and have a brew. So thanks very much, guys. I'll see you all again on another day.
Thank you, Howard.
Cheers,
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Yeah, Tim, can I hand you the final word? I think we've had a fantastic meeting tonight, really enjoyable, some great ideas and from you and from all our contributors.
You can simply use a manual ATU and use half of it, works fine. And the wire that you use can go underneath a dining room table, works fine there too. Heat your toes while you're at it. And for those of us who live inland, the counterpoise wire in the brook or stream is almost as good as the saltwater one. Not quite, but almost as good.
Thank you, Henry. Yes, I agree. I like the comment about warming your toes up. Yeah, definitely. We need to do that in a couple of months' time. It all closes in on us again. So thank you. That's brilliant.
Yeah, Tim, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for a fantastic contribution tonight, and for the contribution of all our people here as well. I know we've got loads of people online tonight. Probably some people are going to regret afterwards not having asked the question they wanted to ask, but there was so much in it. Tim, you'll be welcome back at any time. You'll be very, very welcome to join us when Bob gives his talk about his fun with 40-meter and 80-meter vertical antennas down the other side of the planet. But it's been brilliant. Thank you very much, Tim.
Well, it's been an honour, and I'd like to say well done to you all for setting your club up so quickly and so much enthusiasm. Really brilliant. I'm sure you'll go from strength to strength. I will join, so I will be in touch with you about that, okay? Because I want to be part of the community, and I'll dip in as much as I can on is that on a Wednesday? Will it be the second Wednesday of every month? Is that kind of how it's going?
We probably will eventually settle down on which Wednesdays it is, but I'll let you know. I'll let you know, Tim.
That's absolutely brilliant. So thank you all for inviting me and being so welcoming. And I wish you all to go from strength to strength and have a great evening. And catch you on the bands. So 7-3 from G5TM. All the best to you. Take care.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim.
73 from me, Nick, and the group, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. Great meeting. And thank you, everyone, for your contributions. And thank you to... Yeah, cheers, Gerald. And thank you to everyone who's watching us on YouTube as well.